Good evening. Welcome back to Dead Sleep. It's Nancy Miller, and I have recovered from my little cold. And by the way, thank you to all of the lovely people who reached out to me and wished me good health. I didn't expect that, and I'm really so touched. Now, about tonight's episode. This is part 2 of what was supposed to be one long episode, with the previous episode being like a preview, but I changed my mind. It's just too long as one episode. So for now, this is a story in 2 parts. The previous episode and this one. And we're just going to dive right in. There's no recap or anything. So if you haven't heard part 1, I recommend you do that. There are a lot of details and people to keep straight, including a couple of Nancys. And that's not including this one. So here's the second and final installment of When a Killer Calls. For a long time, the life the Stylers built together, it was exactly as they pictured it. And then, seemingly out of nowhere, they were cursed with troubles. Health problems, financial issues, legal drama. And their whole world, everything they built, fell apart. But now, thanks to Nancy, she and her husband had a new dream, a new thing to build. Her vision of the future looks something like this. You walk into a dark, quiet space. Then you're guided down a hallway where you're beckoned to leave the grit and filth and misery of the world behind. You're handed a plush, fluffy white robe, as soft as a kitten's elbow, and of course some comfy slippers. You then lie down on a table illuminated by soft candlelight. And a kind and caring woman in her early 60s, that's Nancy, she'll put her hands on your face, and she'll invite you to close your eyes and relax. There's nothing more for you to do. From there, she performs her alchemic magic. From steam to scrubs to serums, she'll whisk away all of the toxins in your skin, in your life. And when you walk out that door, you're refreshed, renewed. She and Trey, they'd spent months earning their cosmetology and aesthetology credentials, and her husband's years of experience as a doctor would be the competitive advantage they'd need for a lucrative med spa. But getting your foot in the door in a cozy and competitive place like Aspen would take time. To practice her skills, she offered her new friend Kathy Carpenter free facials and other services. The more Nancy got to know Kathy, the more she understood how the abusive so-called friend and employer, Fancy Nancy, just how bad she was to her. One time, she overheard Kathy on the phone with her sponsor, Sarah, talking about something that Fancy Nancy did that hurt her. And Nancy Styler, she was so shocked she couldn't help but put in her 2 cents. You tell Sarah, if Nancy Pfister treated me like that, I'd probably drink too. This Nancy saw herself as the antidote to Fancy Nancy. She would make it her project to rebuild Kathy's confidence. She couldn't wait to see the results of her new facial techniques on Kathy. Kathy had such pretty brown eyes and lovely wavy brown hair. She deserved a little attention. Helping people was a lot like horticulture. Humans, a lot like plants. If you can optimize and control their environment, show them the proper care, nurture them with abundant attention, a woman like Kathy could transform. emerging out of the mulch of life's disappointments, and blossom anew. And it was obvious the first thing Kathy had to do was purge herself of that toxic relationship with that crazy woman. What was it about Nancy Pfister? She was all the way on the other side of the world, and yet she got under Nancy Styler's skin. How did one woman get away with treating people like she did? She'd never felt so disrespected in her life. It was brutally unfair. Nancy and her husband Trey, they were the brilliant ones. They'd worked hard, and they'd earned their fortune. And yet, they were the ones without a safe place to land, hanging by their fingernails. Somewhere in between the serum and the steam, Kathy and Nancy got close. And Kathy opened up. Things about Fancy Nancy's life that this other Nancy wouldn't know. For instance, Fancy Nancy, her family was rich, but she herself didn't have money. She lived off of a trust fund, doled out in monthly increments of just $7,000 a month. Maybe that was a lot of money to some people, but it was pocket change for someone with her lavish lifestyle, which explained why she was obsessed with money and why she always tried to finagle her way out of paying for things. She even tricked the Stylers into forfeiting their airline points so she could upgrade to a first-class ticket. And then when she asked them to buy her a case of pink champagne, the crate cost $1,000. They bought it assuming she'd pay them back, but she never did. She never would. As her husband Trey mostly stayed at the chalet resting and playing around on his laptop, his wife drove into town, sliding through the snow-flocked streets of downtown Aspen in their sports car. Nancy Styler was networking, making contacts with local businesses, drumming up some early buzz on their spa, maybe even finding a spot where she could get her start. But it seemed wherever she went, all roads led to Nancy Pfister. In her mind, this wasn't gossip. It was essential intelligence. Who knew what Fancy Nancy was capable of? And well, she just wanted to be prepared with as much information as possible. Knowledge being power and all that. Even Fancy Nancy's so-called friends had a story to tell. When she visited a hair salon to refresh her white blonde coif, she learned the hairdresser used to do Fancy Nancy's hair, until the salon started offering customers a glass of wine, and she basically drank the whole bottle and made a scene. There were a lot of stories like that, but at the end of nearly every one, someone would say, "But that's just how she is." It didn't seem right. She came from a fine Aspen family. Her mother, Elizabeth, was a trailblazer, an expert aviator who flew helicopters for the local county's air rescue group. Her father, Art Pfister, made the family's vast fortune by buying cheap land all around Aspen in the 1940s and 50s, transforming the mountain terrain into a ski resort for the rich and famous. She had two sisters, one older and one younger. Nancy was the middle child, and it seems the center of attention. To those who admired her, Fancy Nancy was a free spirit who defied convention, especially with her romances. But for the more conservative people in Aspen, and there were many, Nancy's behavior was scandalous, earning her the nickname No Pants Nance. Still, as her sisters settled down, she continued to enjoy her freedom, even when a fling with a dashing Argentine polo player led to Nancy getting pregnant and giving birth to a baby girl. And she continued her jet-setting lifestyle, often leaving her daughter in the care of the girl's godparents for long stretches of time. The girl's godparents gave her a loving and stable upbringing, an arrangement that seemed to work best for everyone. By 2014, when Fancy Nancy was in Australia and the Stylers ensconced in her chalet, her daughter was a young woman who recognized, sure, her mother wasn't the best, but she accepted her as she was. She admired her mother's spirit, her openness, her curiosity, and her trusting nature. Her mother trusted that things always had a way of working out. It was karma. Karma. For a woman who lived a lavish and self-directed lifestyle, Fancy Nancy's New Age beliefs sometimes caught people off guard. She and Kathy both appeared to follow Buddhist doctrine. The word karma is derived from ancient Sanskrit, its origins in Hinduism. In the word karma, it means action. In popular culture, we sometimes like to refer to karma as good or bad. You either earn good karma or you are inflicted with bad karma. What comes around goes around. But if you follow Buddhist doctrine, the principle of karma is more complex. It's more than the action. It's the thoughts, feelings, intentions behind the action. And to understand one's intentions, one needs to have awareness. And the only way to tap into that awareness is through stillness, which most of us listening to this show can't stand, including me. But in the Buddhist mind, with karma, there's no such thing as luck or happenstance or even fate. We are the architects of our own fate. Anyone looking into the life of Fancy Nancy in February of 2014 would discover the world she built was on the verge of collapse. She and her older sister were at loggerheads over some deal with the family property. Their father, he died years ago. Their mother more recently. And with both parents gone, it was now up to the sisters and a family lawyer to decide if they wanted to sell some last pieces of the family land. Her sister was for it. Nancy was against it. And it wasn't long before things escalated to the point where the women, stopped speaking to each other. The relationship between the two sisters grew so acrimonious, Nancy told friends, if anything ever happened to her, her older sister did it. The real estate situation required Nancy to interrupt her time in Australia and fly back for an important meeting on February 28th, 2014. This was aggravating, but she figured she'd just killed two birds with one stone. The Stylers, this couple, they were turning out to be a real pain in the neck. She told Kathy she wanted the Stylers out of her place by the time she came back from Australia on Saturday, February 22nd. And if they weren't out, she threatened to sell whatever was left behind on Craigslist. For the next several days, the Stylers worked furiously to clear out the house. Kathy offered a hand. They needed all the help they could get, with the packing, the lifting, the moving. It was difficult for Trey and his degenerative muscle disease. He was now in his mid-60s, but appeared closer to being in his 80s. A scrawny, hunched-over, gray-haired man whose wife did just about everything. Trey was capable of doing some things. He had his moments where he would have Herculean bursts of energy, pushing himself to move furniture and hoist boxes into a U-Haul. But the exertion always came with a price. What he did today, he'd pay for it tomorrow, with excruciating pain. It was Saturday, February 22nd. Fancy Nancy was due home from the airport. and Kathy and the stylers scrambled around to get things arranged just as she wanted them. At some point in this frenzy, a frustrated Nancy styler said, "I could strangle that woman." And they all agreed. It was all too much. They joked about how life would be so much better if Nancy never came back. There were still some valuable items, like their spa equipment, still in the chalet. The stylers begged Kathy if they could come back to get these final items, preferably when she wasn't there. They'd be in touch. Then the stylers made their way to their new temporary home, a grim little roadside motel, 25 minutes outside of Aspen, and a world away from where they wanted to be. By Sunday, as Fancy Nancy drank pink champagne with Kathy in her chalet, the other Nancy, she was stuck in a motel watching TV in her old blue bathrobe, and she had to face reality. The dream was gone. They were out of money. They were out of time. They were out of options. Except one. She remembered that they'd agreed. If things ended in disaster, they'd go out together, straight off that cliff, holding hands, like Thelma and Louise. And this dream, it ended in disaster. They were done. Hopelessly defeated, Nancy Styler turned to her husband, Trey, and said, "Let's go for that drive." Hello? Is anyone there? It was a dark, cold Wednesday evening when Kathy Carpenter went over to Nancy's chalet and took a look around. It was eerie. Kathy expected to receive a call or a text from her friend, but she hadn't heard from her since Kathy left that hungover Monday morning a couple of days earlier. At first, it was something of a relief. Kathy needed some space after her relapse that previous weekend. But now, she was worried. Earlier that day, Kathy called a few other friends to see if they'd heard from her. They had not. When she walked into the house, the note, the one she posted near the entryway 3 days earlier, it was still there. "Do not disturb. Nancy is sleeping." The chalet smelled something awful. Fetid. Rancid. Though the Stylers, they had warned her about the smell. They said they'd stop by on Tuesday, and they noticed something shocking. The puppy, Gabe, he'd had an accident, many accidents, all over the house. Gabe's food and water bowl were empty. He must have rummaged through the trash for extra scraps. They called out for Nancy Pfister, but she wasn't there. Trey said he even checked the bedroom, briefly, and didn't see anyone there. And they weren't complaining. The last person they wanted to see was Fancy Nancy. They had no idea where she was, but the Stylers offered a theory. Fancy Nancy probably took off again and simply left Gabe behind. They wouldn't put it past her. After all, didn't she do that to her own daughter? Then maybe, realizing it sounded harsh, Nancy Styler, she expressed concern. Should they be worried? Kathy knew whatever anyone said about Fancy Nancy, she wouldn't just up and leave Gabe. She would have called Kathy to come pick him up. Kathy checked on the puppy. He was in his crate, where the Stylers said they put him. And thankfully, he was completely fine. Kathy called out for Nancy. No answer. Anxious, she took her phone and called her mother. Kathy suffered from respiratory issues, and this anxious feeling only quickened her breath. She asked her mother if she wouldn't mind staying on the phone with her as she went through the house. Living room, kitchen, then up the stairs to the bedroom. She pushed the door open reluctantly, slowly. The room was dark and silent. Kathy would have to step into the bedroom to see if Nancy was there or not. She turned on the light. Nancy wasn't there. Then she took a look at the bed. The very bed she made up just a few days earlier. Kathy distinctly remembered putting Fancy Nancy's favorite horse pattern sheets on that bed. But those sheets were gone. The whole mattress looked stripped. Then she noticed a smear on the sleigh bed's headboard. It looked like blood. Some would later say she could have, should have, left right there. But something was telling her to go towards the closet. She took roughly 10 steps to the bedroom closet. The door was locked. Kathy had to find the key. So she got off the phone with her mother and located the key to the closet. Then she opened the door. "Oh, help me," she cried. 911. What's the address of the emergency? The panicked, shrieking woman on the other end was so hysterical. Her words were incomprehensible. The 911 dispatcher asked for the address again. In between gasps, Kathy Carpenter cried, "It's a house. It's Nancy Pfister's house." "My friend," she panted with terror. The dispatcher asked her to explain what happened. In a hesitant voice, Kathy sputtered the whole story. Like the whole story. How her friend came back from Australia, how there were people staying there, and she'd threatened those people about money, and she hadn't heard from her, and the dog was in the house, and she went to get the dog, and she saw blood on the headboard. Then she went into the closet, and she found her friend dead. When the police arrived, Kathy was in her car with the hazards on. She could barely breathe. She was the only one from the scene who would leave in an ambulance, rushed to the hospital, where she was heavily sedated. Kathy Carpenter would be accused of a lot of lies, but she did tell the truth about this one thing. Her former best friend, ex-drinking buddy, and one-time employer, 57-year-old Nancy Merle Pfister, was indeed dead. What a terrible thing in such a beautiful place. That was lead investigator Lisa Miller's very first thought when she entered the chalet on Buttermilk Mountain. Lisa Miller was an experienced detective who worked homicides, assaults, even led a SWAT team before relocating with her husband from Indiana to Colorado. If she came looking for a quieter, calmer life, she wouldn't get one. Nancy Pfister was a member of Aspen royalty. News of her death would shock the entire town. At first, that 911 call might have seemed like a prank. The rantings of a delusional woman. Because those first officers on the scene, they couldn't find what the caller apparently described. They were told the body of 57-year-old Nancy Merle Pfister was in the bedroom closet. Kathy said she saw her friend's tufts of blonde hair. But when they made their way through the bedroom and located the closet door, the closet was packed with things. It took several minutes of careful poking and prodding until they literally uncovered her remains, wrapped in layers of bedding on the outside, then another layer of plastic, including a plastic bag completely obscuring Nancy's head and face. They didn't even know for certain it was indeed Miss Pfister until the plastic bag was removed, revealing strands of blonde hair, much of it marred by violence and mottled with blood. She was murdered, hit many times, with what they could only assume was a blunt and heavy object like a hammer. But the scope of this murder was beyond local expertise, and the Aspen sheriff wisely called for backup, bringing in Lisa Miller, the veteran investigator who worked for the district attorney's office. Lisa Miller had seen her fair share of homicides, but this one was curious. With this type of fatality, in Lisa's experience, there should have been a lot of blood, but there was barely any. They saw a smear of blood on that headboard and a few drops around the bed, but not much else. And then one of the officers flipped the mattress over, and there it was, a 12-inch circle of blood. So the way Lisa and the investigative team saw it, it went like this. Someone came in while she was sleeping, hit her many times with what was likely a hammer, then somehow moved her body from the bed into the closet. And they did it with incredible speed and dexterity. And yes, she said they. Lisa Miller believed it wouldn't be possible for one person to have done this murder. There had to be at least 2 people, maybe even 3. It didn't take long for her to figure out just who that might be. It was Friday morning, just before dawn, when Nancy Styler awoke to the sound of pounding on the motel door. Good grief, it was so loud. She heard it before she even popped in her hearing aids. She also heard men on the other side demanding for her to open the door. At first, she thought they were coming to rescue them. From what she wasn't sure, Trey, who also wore hearing aids, sputtered awake. And before the two knew what was happening, the entire county police department stormed in, hauling the Stylers away. They were barely decent. Police nearly took Trey away naked before he quickly covered himself in his wife's blue bathrobe. They were told they were wanted for questioning, but it sure felt like they were under arrest. Without clothes, Trey had to wear prison-issued orange jail scrubs. Nancy and Trey Styler were separated and interrogated for hours, but they swore they had nothing to do with Nancy Pfister's death. They were two old people. In the interrogation room, Trey nearly laughed as he pointed to his body. How could he possibly kill anyone? He could barely walk. As for Nancy Styler, she admitted yes, she hated her. And yes, she did joke about wanting to strangle Nancy Pfister, but she wasn't the only one. That crazy woman had all kinds of enemies in this town. Even her own sister. They should start there first, then work down what was likely a very long list. Authorities questioned them without lawyers for hours, and the Stylers insisted they were innocent. Finally, with everyone exhausted, they were let go. Their freedom didn't last very long. Within days of their release, the Stylers were arrested, for real this time, and charged with the murder of Nancy Pfister. It seems they were done in, once again, by a dumpster. While making the rounds, a local cop just happened to find a curious bag stuffed into a public trash bin near the Stylers' hotel. This bag contained a trove of evidence, including the hammer they believed was used to kill Nancy, along with Nancy Pfister's phone, her ID, and a strand of pearls. And as if that didn't clinch it, someone also found the key to that bedroom closet, mere steps from the Stylers' motel room. This evidence was so perfect. Lisa Miller and her investigators had to wonder if it was a little too perfect. What exactly was going on here? Was this some kind of setup? And who would set them up? The Stylers were the ones in custody, but the investigators also had their eyes on Kathy Carpenter from the very beginning. They didn't have any actual physical evidence against her, except there was something about that 911 call. They believed that call sounded over the top and utterly suspicious. They couldn't say for certain, but they knew someone who could. There was an investigator at the Colorado Bureau of Investigations who specialized in a certain type of 911 call analysis. In 2014, this system had been around for a few years, and the Colorado Bureau of Investigations had embraced it as one of the many tools in their investigative work. In this murder case, all they really had against Kathy was this 911 call. So they sent a transcript of the call to the Colorado Bureau of Investigations to see what analysis would reveal. It was possible. This investigator could essentially prove she was likely guilty just from that transcript. Her very first words to the operator on that call were a tip-off. She said the words, "Help me." In this analysis training, an innocent caller always asks for help for the victim first. Those who are guilty were more likely to think of themselves first. Then there was the address. The operator had to ask Kathy multiple times what the address was. She didn't seem to answer the first time. Then she was vague in the details. Then the big one. When asked what happened, an innocent person typically talks about the cause of the injury. But Kathy did what guilty people do. According to this analysis, she told the story. The story she had in her head of what happened. The story she concocted for police. And that was just in the first minute of the call. The investigators' analysis revealed 39 instances of self-incrimination and 0 instances of innocence. Based on that analysis, Aspen authorities were confident Kathy Carpenter was involved. In early March, she was arrested and also charged with murder. Around that time, nearly all of Aspen gathered together at a local bar to honor the life of Nancy Pfister, with plenty of tears, toasts, and pink champagne. In her jail cell, Kathy Carpenter heard the distant din of music, laughter, celebration. She desperately wanted to be out there. Kathy insisted she was innocent, but few believed her. When everyone heard that 911 call and learned of those 39 indicators of guilt, nobody could argue with the FBI-backed data science. Well, except perhaps one other person. Another accused killer who sat in a prison cell a few hundred miles away in Missouri. His name was Russ Faria, and he was just a year or so into a life sentence for the murder of his wife, Betsy. And one of the most damning pieces of evidence used against him was his 911 call to local police. In that call, his voice and choice of words also revealed indicators of guilt. Using the same system of 911 call analysis, it was determined he was too emotional, that his words sounded rehearsed, and while on that call, he suggested his wife's cause of death. He said it was a suicide. Testimony provided at his trial stated that it was clear he was lying. At the trial, it was suggested this 911 call analysis was scientific. But an investigation by the journalism nonprofit ProPublica revealed this so-called method has no scientific merit at all. They looked into multiple cases, including Russ Faria and Kathy Carpenter, in the analysis of these 911 calls, and they found no evidence of any data-backed science or research, but largely the invention of a man who fabricated this system based on his intuition and a wholly insufficient survey of roughly 100 911 calls. This technique has a very tenuous connection to the FBI and isn't a legitimate part of their investigative practices. And yet, according to ProPublica, this system is taught all over the country to police departments and is considered a legitimate tool to discern whether or not someone who's calling 911 is innocent or guilty based on what they say and how they say it. This analysis is considered junk science in many courtrooms across the country. But ultimately, it's up to a judge's discretion to determine whether or not it can be introduced at trial. In Russ Faria's case, the judge allowed it in his first trial, which led to a conviction, one that was later overturned when it was discovered the real killer was Russ and Betsy's perfectly nice neighbor, the now notorious convicted double murderer, Pam Hupp. A name most of us likely know from Dateline's hit podcast, The Thing About Pam. Back in Colorado, authorities accused all three, Kathy Carpenter and the Stylers, of colluding together to murder a woman they all despised. Then, just before a crucial pretrial hearing, one of the three accused made a startling confession. Dr. William Trey Styler declared he was the one who did it, and he insisted he acted entirely alone. Kathy and his wife, they had nothing to do with it. In Trey's version of events, that Monday morning, Trey Styler left the motel as his wife slept soundly and made his way to the chalet to pick up their things, hoping, if Fancy Nancy was there, he could reason with her. After Kathy left for work, he said he knocked on the door. When he didn't hear anything, he assumed no one was home. Then, he said, he made his way to the bedroom and was surprised to see Nancy still in bed. He said he called her name, but she didn't respond. Jet-lagged, Nancy wore eye shades and earplugs and likely didn't see or hear Trey. But in his mind, he mistook her genuine obliviousness for something else. He believed she was faking being asleep, ignoring him, pretending he wasn't there, like he was invisible. And he decided in that moment he wanted her to pay for destroying their lives, especially the life of his beautiful wife, who for the first time ever contemplated suicide. Telling him she wanted to go on that drive, Thelma and Louise style, and he couldn't let that happen. He described how he experienced a rush of adrenaline, so powerful he was capable of committing a violent physical murder. Then he managed to move, wrap, and carry a dead body across the room and into the bedroom closet. He said he hid her there. Then he took a few items, her phone, her passport, a pearl necklace that he knew she liked, to make it seem like she'd taken off somewhere. He disguised what happened by flipping over a giant mattress. Then he put all of those items and the murder weapon into a plastic bag and put it in the trunk of his Jaguar. And then he went back to the motel as if nothing happened. And he had a senior moment and forgot that those items were in his Jaguar until a couple of days later when he tried to dispose of the evidence in that public trash can, and he must have dropped the key out of his pocket. He was a brilliant doctor, but he was a terrible criminal. Lisa Miller and her team, they weren't buying it. And when they mentioned that they had evidence that both his cell phone and his wife's cell phone pinged off the tower at the same time, in the same place, on that Monday, he said he brought the phone with him. He did that so his wife wouldn't be disturbed, so she could sleep in. But to investigators, this didn't quite make sense. They understood that his wife wore hearing aids. Why would he worry about the ring of a phone that he knew his wife couldn't hear? There were other details, too, that didn't add up, including the exact location and nature of her injuries. And at one point, he took a lie detector test, and he failed. But so did Kathy Carpenter, though for different reasons. Simply put, they believed Trey didn't know enough, and Kathy knew too much. But Trey said he did it, and he would plead guilty to all of the charges if Kathy and Nancy, his wife, could go free. And in a decision that upset a lot of people, the prosecution agreed. They made a deal with Trey Styler. Lisa Miller was not happy about this, but Trey Styler did indeed plead guilty in the murder of Nancy Pfister and received a 20-year sentence. It didn't sound like much, but it was an ample sentence for a man in his condition. Nancy Styler was released and cleared of all charges. Eventually, Kathy Carpenter was also free. But the circulation of that 911 call cast a shadow of suspicion over the rest of her life until Kathy's death in 2023. As for Nancy Styler, she swore she was stunned by her husband's actions, that somehow she spent 3 nights in a 200-square-foot motel with her husband, sleeping next to him, and had no idea that he'd killed Nancy Pfister. She denounced him and vowed to file for divorce. But roughly a year after his sentencing, Trey Styler was found in his cell. His death was ruled a suicide. And thanks to that old insurance policy, his death benefit would go to his wife, Nancy. A payout of $1 million. Lisa Miller is still suspicious. In an interview with our man Keith Morrison in 2025, Lisa Miller said that there was evidence of Nancy Styler's DNA on the handle of the hammer. And there were details in Trey's confession about what he did and how he went about it that simply didn't match the reality. But what upset people in Aspen the most was when Nancy Styler published a memoir, one that they claimed capitalized on Nancy Pfister's death, using her murder as a way to tell Nancy Styler's side of the story. And when you read the memoir, it's true. It's Nancy Styler who sees herself as a victim, not Fancy Nancy. And so it seemed that was that. Nancy Styler was free, and she was a millionaire. Then, in around 2017, Fancy Nancy's daughter sued Nancy Styler for $25 million in a wrongful death suit. That wrongful death suit, it was settled out of court. And the payout, it was very close to $1 million. Essentially taking back all of the money she made from that life insurance policy, which, in the end, kind of gave Fancy Nancy the final word. And that word was karma. Thank you again for listening. Once again, this is just a version of the story. If you want the full scope of this case, please see the links in the show notes. I'll be back next week with a whole new episode. Until then, nighty-night.